Hello and welcome to a demonstration for Django for everybody. This is to install Django on Python Anywhere. In a sense, we're going to just be getting started. This is a bit tricky because there's a tutorial on how to write your first Django application. There's a tutorial on how to set up Django.org on Python Anywhere. And neither of these are exactly perfect. So what I've got is an assignment that sort of walks you through a series of things that lay down some necessary things for this class. And so the first thing we're going to do is you should have a Python Anywhere account. And you should be able to log in on the Python Anywhere account. And you should be able to get somewhere. So this is my Dr. Chuck. This is my account that I use to, I used to be a student on this. There's other accounts that I have for the production stuff. But this is one of my student accounts. And so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to use a console. And you're going to start a bash shell. So this is actually Linux. And I love Python Anywhere. I love the fact that we're learning Linux. Hopefully you'll just get a little more comfort with Linux as we go. But this is where you're going to do a lot of the command line of the system. So we're going to do make dir virtual environment. You might be able to make this Python 3.7 or Python 3.8. The later that Python is, the better. This is going to take a while because it's going to create what's called a virtual environment that allows you to have your own version of Python, your own set of installed Python libraries, and virtual environments are a wonderful thing in Python because then you don't have to ask the owner of this system, which is Python Anywhere, hey, could you upgrade the Python? Turns out you can upgrade the Python all by yourself. So we will sit and let this, oh, there we go. It ran right away. And ran right away. So let's go do the next thing. The next thing I know takes a long time. So the next step is to install Django. Now this is pip, is installing software. So it's going to download a bunch of software, and then it's going to install that software, and it's installing it in our Django 3 environment, right? And so this is not installing it for the whole system. It's just installing it for us. And so you'll get used to the idea that you've got to work on the Django in your appropriate Django environment. We're using Django 3.0 in this situation. As the recording of this, Django 3.0.2 is out. Django 3 is quite nice. So we'll just sit and watch this for a while. So it's finished, and now we have it installed. Now there's a command that gets us into, this is redundant right now because we're already in it, but work on Django 3, make sure that you're in it. Then the next thing to do is grab this command and make sure your Django version is right. If that says 3.02 or later, then life is good and you have your Django working. Now, I want to also have you install some of the sample code in the class. Let me get this started and I'll explain what's going on. So this is GitHub, and this is code that I maintain, and I can update this code and I can send it to you. And so this is a lot of sample code. So if you go to DJ4E tab, hit the tab key to do completion there. There is a bunch of files in here, and this is the kind of sample code that we're going to go through in the class. And so we need to add the requirements. Pip, again, is the dependency manager. There's a file requirements.txt that says, hey, we need a whole bunch of libraries. And so let's install those libraries. Now, in your first Python applications, you're not going to need all of these libraries, but I want to get them installed into your virtual environment early on so that as we go along, you're not going to add a feature like social authentication, which is this little application right there, like social authentication, and then oops, we had to install a thing. So I want to get all that stuff installed at the beginning. And this will take a little while, so we'll just pause for a bit. Okay, so that finished. And now what we want to do is run a command, manage.py check. You're going to run this command a lot. And this, we're in actually a Django application, and this Python manage py check reads through your files and these files that point to other files, looks for syntax errors, and it's a good way to check the sanity of your application, because if it won't pass this manage.py check, it's not going to start. We haven't even tried to start this application yet and put it up on the web. For now, we're doing that. So don't worry about this message. We'll get to that later. We can say Python 3 manage make migrations, and in this one it's going to say no change detected, and then we're going to run migrate, and that will create a bunch of database tables. Don't worry too much about that. So we've finished there. Now we're going to actually pick up in the Django application, but we're going to basically make a new Django. We're going to make a folder. So we're going to go back to our home directory. CD tilde says go back to home directory. And we're going to make a directory called Django projects. This is so you can have more than one of them. We're going to go into that directory, CD Django projects, and then we're going to start the project my test site. Now what this does is this actually created a whole bunch of files in my test site. Okay. Now we do have to edit one file. I'm going to edit this file. Now I have a whole thing on how to edit files on Python Anywhere. I'll do it I'll do it the way you probably will do it, and that is use this files screen. Oops, I have to go back and get my shell, dang it. Console, open like a new tab. You'll find that you'll want to go back to that console. So here I am. I want to edit some files, so I can go into Django projects, my site, and then settings.py is the file that it's telling me to edit. So it's just my site. It's a little weird that the name is doubled. You got to go down to around line 28 and say add quote star quote. And that has to do with protecting what systems can talk to this web server, and we're just going to say anybody can do it. Do not set this default. Forget this warning. It's a lie. We are not in production. We are in development. So then we have to say save. So then we'll save our file. Okay. So let's go back. We had to do that. Here's different ways of editing the file. You could use nano on the command line. That's cool. I just use this #1 way to do that. VI is really cool, but we won't do that. Okay, so now we need to convince Python Anywhere to run the application. Okay, and so that is under another tab. That is under, and I'm going to open this in a new tab. So now I have these files. Actually, I don't need this tab anymore. I have my, I should say Python 3 manage.py check here just to kind of be creative. Yeah, that's good. So you always want to do Python 3. I'm in this file, the site, the actual website that has manage.py in it. Python, actually, you don't have to say Python 3 anymore. It's after the year 2020. So you can say Python manage py.check. You'll see me type Python 3 all the time because old habits die hard during the transition from Python 2 to Python 3. So that's good. That suggests that this application in Django projects is in good shape. So now I have to go look at this web app setup. And what's going on here is this is Python Anywhere's way of taking the code in that folder and running it and giving you a web address for that. And so the first thing you got to do is you got to set this up. This is correctly set up. You got to point to the folder that has that manage.py in it. And if I go to the console and type pwd, print working directory, you see home Django Dr. Chuck's my site. And this is the file that has the folder that has manage.py in it. So these two things have got to be right. This code here has also got to be right. When you see this, it's going to start out really big. throw it all away, throw the sample away. I give you the entire code to put in there. And again, it's all setting up which site. And then, we also have to set the virtual environment in this web tab. Gotta go back to the web tab. We've got to set this virtual environment. And I want that to be, you gotta go and change the name of it. Don't do the same as me. This is for my virtual environment. So it checks, yep, there's a good virtual environment. So you gotta have this source code, working directory, WSGI configuration file, and virtual environment set properly. We'll come back to this. These are error logs. And if all goes well at this point, let's double check the assignment. Hit the reload. It's what it says. So every time you change your code, you have to tell Python anyway. So this takes a little bit. And if all goes well, I will open this URL in a new tab. And it worked. Debug is true. Please leave debug true, or else this course is going to be really tiresome for you. Okay, so that's the first step, but then we have a little bit more work to do. We're going to add a polls application. So we're going to go back into that. I'm already in that folder. I'm in that folder, and then I'm going to start an application. Oops. Come back. I'm going to build an application. This is a way to create a bunch of source code. So one of the things about Django is that it comes with batteries included. And so in this particular case, it's writing a bunch of code in a folder named polls. Okay. And so that's now in polls. And then we go continue on our, now we're going to pick up in this Django tutorial. So we said start at polls. We did that. And we're going to edit a file, polls/views.py, and I'll copy this code here. Open in a new tab, and Django projects, my site, polls, views.py. So I'm going to put that code from the tutorial in there. Okay, so that code is in the tutorial. Going back to the tutorial, it says create a file called urls.py in that same folder and put in this code. So I'll copy this. So I'm going to create a new file here, urls.py, new file. Let's put that stuff in there and save that file. Then we go back, and then we are going to go in the my site. So polls urls.py is an application. My site is for the entire site. And so I'll grab this code also. This file already exists, so we go my site, settings. This is the only folder that has settings.py in it. Oh, I wasn't supposed to edit settings. I was supposed to edit URLs. And this looks pretty good. We'll just add the line. Well, actually, we got to do all of it because we have to import the include. So this little import include, this little part here was there. So I copied this. These are all, of course, comments. So all these files are just some Python. This is setting a variable called URL patterns to an array, and path is a thing that returns an object. And so you can go read and you should read all the documentation. And then I will save this. And then let's go back. Now, every time you see here when it says Python 3 manage run server, you want to go do Python 3 manage check. So that's like do everything but run server except run the server. And again, you could get errors here. and read those errors. They're tracebacks. It'll say, oh, no comma found. Let me just make a mistake so you see what happens. I'm not making mistakes. Come back. Let's go into this file. Let's forget a parenthesis. Okay? Let's save it. Shocking. See? So now, when I did a Python 3 manage py check, it blows up and it tells me, oh, something's kind of funky around line 22 of urls.py. Looky look. I mean, my editor even told me that. So there we go. So I fix that back up and I say save. And now I go back and I type, by the way, you can hit up arrow and you can run a command again. Python 3 manage.py finds no issues. So then what do we do to test our application? We go to the web app. Now we've got these guys set up. We don't have to change those. They're all set up again. So we hit the reload button. Take a little bit of moment. Then we go over to our actual application. Now this looks like a failure, but it's not, because it turns out that that little bit of code you run is sitting in polls. And so that's the code that you ran. And so at this point, you have completed the assignment. I got a little bit about errors down there. But so we walked through that. Wasn't too bad. Getting things set up is often the hardest bit, but hopefully in a little bit of time you'll have it all working, and then we'll start adding things to our application. So hope this was helpful. Cheers. Hello and welcome to our lecture on HTML, the hypertext markup language. So we're going to place this in the context of our request response cycle, and sort of here's us in the request response cycle in our browser and what we're seeing. We make a click, it goes across the network to the web server, runs some code, maybe talks to a database, formats up some new stuff, and we get the response. Then HTML comes out, and then that's parsed to make the DOM, and what we see is the document object model. And we're going to ignore most of that in this lecture. We are really only going to talk about this part here, and that is what this response is. It's HTML, and it is parsed, and it's read through, and it's used to construct the document object model, which then shows what we see. And so HTML is just a technique of using some special characters, less than and greater than, to add tags to indicate what we want to see, like the paragraph tag. The paragraph tag, that's a paragraph tag. Strong tag makes things bold. Emphasize tag and a paragraph tag. And so we have these tags and we just mark up. We're communicating meaning. If you're old enough to remember, word processors used to have ways to look at the actual codes that were being stored in the word processor file. So the web is, the HTML and hypertext transport protocol and all that stuff is a relatively recent invention, and we're doing so many cool things with it. It's continuously evolving, and really, we're less than, we're in a 20 years old, and so we're doing so much with it, it's continuously evolving. So HTML and CSS are really kind of at the edge. Looking back in the early days, if we take a look at what HTML was really intended to do, it worked on a Next computer in the early 1990s. And so this is the Next browser, which came from CERN, and it had everything in a new window. Images were not shown in line. And then there was the NCSA Mosaic browser, which was the first browser that was universally available on Unix, Windows, and Macintosh. And you see things like gray background and blue links and highlighted links that you visited in purple. And so in the early days, it was nothing like what we see today. In the early days, we were just amazed and happy that we could see a link and you'd click a link and something would happen. But today, money is to be made based on making stuff super beautiful and the number of pixels and how things line up and how things are shoved over and how navigation looks. And so today we need to create beautiful web pages, whereas in the old days we were just amazed to have web pages that worked in the first place. And of course, computers have gotten much faster, capable of handling video and images. And back in the old days, images were costly. both for network bandwidth and for the time it took your computer to display them. And so that just affected how we did it. And it's kind of fun to use the Wayback Machine, otherwise known as the Internet Archive, to go back and look at some of these older web pages and realize that it's still amazing that a lot of them pretty much work. And in the good old days, HTML was kind of a Wild West. The browsers did not want to show broken HTML as broken HTML, and so they compensated for it. And so in the old days, we had things like tags that could be uppercase. We would have a paragraph tag that didn't finish. We would have li tags that didn't finish. We would have attributes that didn't even have double quotes in them. So there was all kinds of stuff. And literally, you can take this bad page and you could put it into a web browser and it will still display. So HTML, while it technically is a very precise language and you can make syntax errors, browsers are extremely flexible in terms of parsing it. Now, you're not going to get predictable results. The browsers can go into what's called quirks mode. And so in order to create the standards environment that we have today, Tim Berners-Lee, one of the original founders of the World Wide Web, helped found an organization called the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C. And it really decided that instead of just letting people write a browser and having HTML be defined by the browser, instead they would write a spec for what HTML was, and then multiple vendors could produce the browsers. And it took a while for this to become successful, but there was a need for every vendor to build a web browser, and so they worked with the World Wide Web Consortium. And like the mid and late 90s, 95, 96, well 94 through 98, 99, World Web Consortium created a lot of wonderful standards around the World Wide Web. Now, once we started having rules, then we tend to want to follow those rules. And so tags need to be lowercase. Attributes like this image source equals have to have double quotes around them. You have to have open tags and closed tags, open tags and closed tags. And so there's a set of rules, and now we are much more precise about our HTML. And we try to write it as precise as we can so that we get the best performance and the best sort of rendering out of the browsers that we can possibly get. Because if you don't write precise HTML, then the browsers are going to make decisions as to how to render things. Whereas if you write precise HTML, then you really are in control of how the browser lays things out. So up next, we're going to talk about HTML itself, look at some HTML documents, and take a look. Welcome back. So let's talk about some of the basic syntax of HTML. The first thing is to look at the overall document layout. And they start with an HTML tag. You might have a thing called a doc type up here, and we can put in one if we like, but HTML is the outer tag, and then there is a head tag and an end head tag, and this is sort of non-printing information. We set styling up, we declare the title of a page, perhaps load some JavaScript, and then the printable page of the content is in between a body tag, and mostly what we're going to talk about is the stuff that we put in as page content. So you'll find that there are special file names that we use. It really has to do with the fact that what we do is we make a directory within the web server, and when we go visit the directory, the web server looks through a series of files that it's configured to look to, things like index.html, index.htm, or index.php, and each one has a slightly different order and a slightly different set of things. It might even be called default.htm or default.asp if you're on a Windows box. It is configurable, so different systems do things differently, but usually index.htm is probably the safest thing unless you're doing PHP, which we will be doing later in index.php. And so those are usually the safe bet. Now, when you're viewing things off of disk, which we can do, if you download all the code that I've got in html.zip, then you'll have to open the index.html by hand. So we can put multiple files in the same directory, and then we can use them in what are called relative links. And so we can easily create links between one file and another. And so you'll tend to see, if you look at the zip file, that you've got a whole bunch of files in the same directory. And with little anchor tags, they point back and forth between each one. And so, like I said, you got tags like the paragraph tag, the strong tag, and the emphasize tag. They have to start, they have to stop. But another thing that's really important about HTML is the fact that most of the time we are logically marking up the text. And so we're saying we want this stuff right here to be a paragraph.
but the end of the lines that we put in the HTML that we write are not really that important. What happens is depending on the width of the browser, if you change the width of the browser, the text will be rewrapped. And that's because there's still a paragraph, but we don't want to hard code it because we're not working on paper. Sometimes browsers are really large, sometimes browsers are really small, sometimes you're on a phone, right? And on a phone, browser's really small. And so you don't want to tell exactly how many pixels it is wide, except when you start doing really fancy layout. But in things like paragraphs, you just say, hey, make it a paragraph and rewrap it. And that also, the rewrapping then also changes how tall the pages are, because the narrower pages, it kind of extends the page down. But the white space inside of the HTML is really generally ignored, and the lines are generally ignored. There are some tags, like the pre-tag, that changes that, so white space is respected and new lines are respected. But most of the time, we just let the browser rewrap things, and it's good. You have beginning tags and ending tags. So here's a beginning tag, and then here's the ending tag. The slash is our indication of an ending, and they're paired. And they're also nested. So this P tag has a strong tag within it and an M tag within it, and that's totally okay because this whole thing is a paragraph and this is a piece of bold text. So they have beginning and end, and slash is the end. You can also have self-closing tags that have like an image tag that has like a slash, and that means that you don't have to have like a slash image over here. That's the same. You just put a slash here and it self-closes. Another thing that you will get used to is the fact that you can put on the opening tag attributes, so key value pairs. And you'll go define what you go read the documentation on the image tag and it'll say, oh, put a source attribute on to say what picture, what file we want to display as the picture. And the image tag is to show pictures, basically. So given that less than and greater than and other things are special characters, we have to have a way to print the special characters. So how do we print a special character? Well, we use ampersand LT semicolon, and there's a whole list of these things. HTML special characters. And you can look them up. And there's some that are kind of fun, like the special characters for the deck of cards. There's mathematical special characters, and you go look these up and you can find them. The key thing is they're cute, and you'll see that I'll use some of these arrows in the things that I'm doing. But the key ones that you really need to know about are less than, greater than, and ampersand. And just because ampersand becomes a special character, less than, greater than, or ampersand are really the special characters in HTML. And so to represent less than, you do ampersand LT, ampersand GT, and ampersand MP semicolon to get those things right. HTML comments, like in any programming language, any situation, the start of an HTML comment is less than exclamation dash dash. It's a little clunky, but we just want to make sure it's really clear. And so dash dash less than comments can go across many lines if that's what you want to do. So that works as well. Links is a critical element of HTML. It's why search engines work. It's why, when I first saw it, I'm like, I click on a thing and there's a new page. Isn't that amazing, right? And so hyperlinks is the H in HTML. It's the H in HTTP. And so it is how we, in effect, use this thing that we're sort of just scribbling on to create knowledge that Google then can extract. And so the anchor tag, the A tag, is the tag that we use to do these things. And so, there's a header one, a paragraph, and the anchor tag this is the start tag and this is the end tag. And so the text that's clickable is second page, and you can see that it's clickable right there. It is styled with a underline and blue to indicate that it's a link. And so there's the href, which stands for hypertext reference, and then it's an attribute, so it's key value with double quotes, and then this is another URL. And so that's like, in effect, putting that URL up and going into that next page. So it's a hotspot. In the early days, and I'll show you a few of these links were like the coolest thing ever, and so we made them pretty colors, like the blue with the dash. People didn't when they first saw the web, they didn't know to click places, so we sort of styled them quite brightly. And then because you were often scanning and searching the whole web, because the web wasn't so big in the beginning, we would mark them as purple after you'd been to it. So you could sort of slowly but surely work your way through the whole internet as it existed back in the old days and keep track of the ones so you didn't have to go back to the ones that you'd seen before. And that was an absolute link, and here's one with a relative link, and that assumes that we are now in the same folder, same directory on the server, where we have href, and so here's the start tag, here's the end tag, and then first page is the clickable stuff. And you'll note that that is a purple link because I have already been there, because page1.htm was exactly where I just came from. And so you click on that, and then you can go back and forth, and those are the pages we played with in the HTTP lecture. And so these absolute references are references that start with, HTTP or HTTPS or whatever, and relative references don't. And so that basically means that this page1.htm file has to be in the same folder as whatever file we happen to be viewing right now on the same server. So if you want to switch folders or switch servers, you have to use absolute references. And if you are just moving between files on the same server, you can use relative references. Images are a lot of fun. In CSS, we'll see how to wrap text. One of my favorite things was to wrap text. There is an image tag, which we saw before, image, and then the source equals is the attribute, and then in quotes the name of the file. And it can either be an image that's all by itself. In this case, it's this paragraph is what we're seeing, and you can see that this image is a tiny image, but it's sort of like blah, 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 blah. The image right here works kind of like a character. You got to be careful because the images can be really big. That's why I made a tiny image. And you could even, for example, in this case, I have an anchor tag, and the clickable part of the anchor tag is an image. So if you click right there, that will move you to lists.htm. And so you can make an image be a hypertext reference as well. Now we're going to do much more with these things, and this is just, at this point, the basics. Lists are an important part of HTML. There's ordered lists and unordered lists. And so the unordered list starts with the UL tag and ends with a UL tag, and then that sort of bounds the whole list. And then each list element starts with an LI, list item, and /LI. And I want a little bit of spacing. If you don't put them in paragraphs, you don't quite get the default spacing. This blank line's really coming from the paragraphs. So I'm putting a list of paragraphs, basically. It doesn't have to be a list of paragraphs. You could make a little denser list with a list of links or something, but I'm putting paragraphs in. And so you can see that I have LI to end LI, LI to end LI. I'm putting some links in here, etc., etc. And so ... and it puts all the bullets in. It does the indenting automatically. We'll see in a bit how we can control all that formatting and do different things if we want to do those different things. But for now, we're just going to play with the default formatting and learn the HTML, which is our way of representing that we want a list on the screen, but we're not so fancy about exactly how it's supposed to look. So in HTML, we really are looking for the meaning of the page, not how pretty it is. Tables. Tables have a bit of a checkered past. In the early days, people tended to use tables to lay pages out on grids. And they would just put, a paragraph here and a paragraph here and then a paragraph underneath it, and they would move them around, and they would put images in some of the table cells. And that turned out to be really bad, and that notion of tables as graphic layout is long gone, and we use CSS now, which is the next lecture. But tables were always a good idea for tabular data. And so if you have something that sort of makes sense, is like a list of cars with some make, model, and mileage columns and a list, then you mark them up. And so the table markup is pretty straightforward. We start a table with a table tag, and then we have a series of rows using the tr tag, tr to /tr. And then if there's a header line, which can be formatted a little bit different, we do a th to /th. And then this basically says it's going to be a 3-column table because we have 3 table headers, 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to put TDs for the data. TD stands for data, 1, 2, 3. And so that's the Ford, edge, and then the mileage of that, and on and on and on and on as we go. And so it's not hard to build them. You kind of have to keep track of how many of these things you've got. And there are tricks where you can make a table that has like 4 things, but then in one row this expands so that's, I can't erase it. Can't erase it. So there are ways to do things where a data element spans more than one column, call span, for example. But the key to tables is that we use them for tables. We don't use them for arranging things that are not themselves row, 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 row. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to record some exploration of some sample code at www.webapplicationsforeverybody.com/code/html. And I really am intending that you will, these are very simple pages, but the idea is to look at them in developer mode and take a look at them, and then you can see how the various things work. And you can also then look at the source code and see, oh, here's how a pre-tag works. Or where's the pre-tag? No. Oh. Yeah. So we look at the source code, take a look at things, and show that the line wrapping does not actually matter. We look at pre-tag in another one. So I'll record some walkthroughs of all this sample code, but I encourage you to take a look at it because it has a lot of good examples of the basics of HTML. And so HTML is a continually evolving thing. It's a very creative space. It's a lot of fun. We have to be really tempted. We have to avoid the temptation of trying to make everything look pretty in the HTML, but instead delegate that to the CSS, which is what we're going to talk about.
Hello and welcome to Web Applications for Everybody. In this screencast, we are going to play with some of the sample code, and you can either download it and play with it on your own computer, or you can look at it in your text editor, or if you just want to browse it, you can browse it here and take a look at the version that I'm using. It's really been intended that you look at this in the developer tools, and so you can do things like, say, inspect element. And so here we are. This will also be a little more valuable even when we're doing CSS, but you can see the document object model. Now the interesting thing here is it shows something I'm always talking about, is the difference between the document object model and the source code. So this is the document object model. It's kind of stylized. If you look at the source code, you have to say view page source. And so the source code, this is literally exactly what's in the file. And if you go look at this file in a text editor, you will see this. And if you're looking at it here, it doesn't quite look exactly the same, and some things have been done a little bit differently. You know, they kind of got this extra stuff. And this is kind of after the browser has looked at it. And when we start talking about JavaScript and changing some of this dynamically, you'll see this part is the document object model. But the source never changes. The source is what was originally downloaded when the server sent this back to us. So let's take a basic look at this. I'll hide this unless I need it. I'll go back and forth between the source. So we have a basic document, HTML, with a head tag and a body, and then a header. And of course, here's our header. We're using default styling, and paragraphs are an important part of things. You can squeeze this up as much as you want. White space sort of doesn't matter, right? So this white space kind of doesn't matter here. The fact that this has got extra space, it doesn't much matter. And so you can see an anchor to a strong tag that leads to a boldness. Let's just go ahead and look at it here in the inspect. We'll go down here, we'll find like a strong tag, that's the bold. We got an emphasize tag, and if you look a little farther, you'll see there is the anchor tag, which is the whole anchor tag is this whole tag from the A to the /A list.htm. That's where we're going to go if we click on this text right here. And so you can see, now this is a relative link, and it turns it into an absolute link, and that's because the browser knows where we're at, and so it sort of prefixes everything up to that to the relative link. But that's nice, because if we look in folders, we will see that these folders are all here. Here, let me go find you that folder. It's pretty deep in my... Later, this will all make wonderful sense to you. I do a lot of stuff with web. Code, HTML. Okay, so here we have, after all that, here we have the files, right? And so this is index.htm, and index.htm is right there, and list.htm. And so if I click here,
I'll go to list.htm, and that'll pull this other file up. And so these guys are all in the same folder together. It just means that I can use relative links to go moving between them. A tag that's really becomes more important, especially as when we're talking about writing code inside HTML and showing people code, is the pre-tag. And so the pre-tag, and you can just say inspect to hop right down to where the pre-tag is. The pre-tag respects spaces, so all these spaces happen, the new lines happen, and it also shows it in monospace font. Now you can change all these things once we get to CSS, but pre-tag, when we're printing debug out from, not in files like this, but when running code, sometimes it's good to print debugging out in pre-tags. So let's go to the next page. And so here's a whole series of things we're going to play with. This is a unnumbered list. This whole thing is an unnumbered list from top to bottom. So when I highlight this, you see the whole beginning to end of the list. Then each item in the list has a start and end li tag, right? Down, down, down. You know, so here's this. We should learn about tables. And there's a href, there's another relative link, and so this is sort of my jumping off page to get to all those other things, right? Learn about tables, etc., etc. And so you can see these. We probably use just to take a look at the source code of this page. And so that's the source code that I typed in, and you can see the li tags, the p tags. I'm putting p's inside of li's to get space. Let's see if I can sort of show you that. So if you look at this and you look at the li tag, the li tag is that, and the paragraph is what actually creates the vertical and horizontal space, right? So that orange that you're seeing, that's paragraph. There's space that the paragraph tag has preset. So that's how I do that, putting paragraphs and hrefs, and so that's what this all looks like. So let's take a look at special characters. And so this is an interesting thing because it's not really what came out, because less than requires ampersand LT, but it's kind of processing that. So let's take a look at the source code to this one, because that'll be more instructive. So ampersand LT, ampersand GT, ampersand amp. This is an ampersand in HTML, and then just the letters AMP semicolon. Semicolon's not special. There are only really three truly special characters: less than, greater than, and ampersand. And you can put all kinds of fun stuff, clubs, hearts, and diamonds. And so you got the clubs, hearts, and diamonds, some arrows, stuff like that. What's nice is browsers just have these built in, although they're not necessarily the sexiest or coolest things. And I think what happens when I go back on this link is I go back to the list. So that's just special characters, and you'll notice that the default styling that says we've seen this one, and this is how the web worked 1,000 years now, back in the 90s, is you sort of, oh, it's kind of nice that it's turning purple. And you'll notice that Google does this as well when you're doing Google searches. It actually lets the links change color after you visited them. So let's take a look about links. We look at links. I'll view the source of this guy. Absolute link, href, right? And then /a, this is the clickable text, right, between the beginning tag and the ending tag. The attributes are on the beginning tag. Another attribute that you can add, and I do it all the time, is target equals blank. And that basically is the way we say, open this up in a new tab. So you'll notice pop up in a new tab. And so that's where that one goes when it pops up. And so you can decide whether or not you want this to go in the same page back, or in a new page. And then I got to close the tab to get back. And now I'll go back, because that's just a relative link to list.htm. So I can go back and look at the next thing. Let's take a look at how images are represented. So this is just a paragraph that has an image in it. Right, so it's a paragraph, but there's the image. Source equals medium.jpg. If you look in my folder, you see the image right there, medium.png. You don't see the suffix because Mac is trying to hide it from me. And so that's just, you see this space here and here. The image doesn't have any space. We could add some with CSS later, but the paragraph is what's adding that space. Then we have just a regular old paragraph. I'm not supposed to use a center tag. We'll get to the how to center stuff, so that's what that is saying right there. And you can have an image that's right in the middle, so you see where that image is. I think of images, if they're right in the middle of text, they're like a giant character, and so that's how that works. And you can even sort of stick an image as the thing inside of a link. So here's the anchor tag. It's that bit right there, and then the anchor tag body is an image. And so if I click on that, it's going to go back to list.htm. You'll notice these all go back to list.htm, so I can work on the next thing, right? Tables. Again, you're not supposed to use tables for laying out like blocks of text, which we used to do. We used to do things like use tables to draw borders around things, which we'll see in CSS, but now that's totally verboten, and you're supposed to look at tables in a way that they're, you know, nice and pretty. So let's do a view source here. So let's see, there's our table, our slash table, and a table row. Now let's take a look at the DOM. So apparently I didn't put a T body. We're supposed to put a T body in there, and I didn't do it, but this is the DOM. The DOM put it in. That's put in by the parsing, and so clearly I made a little mistake in my HTML because I didn't put a T body tag, and so that was added by the browser. As it was parsing and reading through this, like, oh, he forgot his T body. So it just like slapped one in for me. And I think the mistake is this is my header row, and I think that should be like a T head. So there I go, bad HTML. It's the story of my life. And then I've got the rows, and you'll notice that the DOM is kind of prettier. So sometimes I do this. The DOM is indented nicely. So this isn't really the source code. This is the data that represents this visual, right? It is the thing that you're seeing, but it read this from the file or from the server, parsed it, and produced the document object model. I only say that like a million times. Okay, so back we go to the lists. We're making pretty good time. So here's some really bad HTML. I'm going to view source on it, and again you'll see sort of the difference between the document object model. When you're debugging these things, you will have to sometimes view source. Sometimes document object model will be the only way to debug it, and sometimes view source. So this is the one that's got bad stuff, like H1 is uppercase. This paragraph tag is not terminated. This UL tag is uppercase. This LI is not terminated. I don't have double quotes here. So there's a series of mistakes that I've made in this HTML, but it looks pretty good. And you'll notice in the document object model, it's fixed all that. Now, each one is lowercase. The P tag is finished. There are double quotes, meaning the document object model is not just your HTML source code. It's like the sensible, parsed, pretty version of the HTML source code, you know. And so, you know, this UL tag, these LI tags are now done. The UL is lowercase, everything's lowercase. So it's like, I'll take care of your mess. I'll patch up and fix your HTML, and then I'll display it for me and make sense of it. So the document object model is not the same. It is sort of like a sweet, awesome, better version of it. But this is what changes that. So let me just show you something, how I can change the document object model. Let's see. Let me see if I can change this text. I change the document object model. That changes. So I'm actually, but that didn't change the source code here. The source that it was retrieved to produce it, but I can change the document object model. And later in the class, we'll write code that will actually change the document object model. So we'll change this. We'll call this be going to lists yet again. So I can change the document object model. Doop. So you see it changed it. So when we change document object model, what we see in the browser changes, but the source doesn't change. Did I say that enough times? So let's click on this and go back to lists. Okay, so some HTML can be broken so badly so that it doesn't render at all. Whoops, that didn't work so well. I'll do a view source on it, and then I will let you figure out why this doesn't work, why this doesn't show. You take a look at the source, you figure it out. I hope this has been helpful to you.